All right. And I am getting a few messages. I heard you, Tammy, earlier that my Rumsey is backwards on my screen. So I will ask everybody to just ignore that for a moment. I'll fix it as we get going. But welcome everybody who joined us. I'm Julia Santagata here at Rumsey Electric. I manage our automation and networking team. And we're excited to host this session with you guys, direct with some of the Rockwell product team to talk about kind of the next generation of visualization. I think as a lot of you guys know, there's been several new products introduced over the last couple of years that really make up the next generation of HMI solutions from Rockwell. But we probably haven't had the opportunity to talk cohesively about it and some of the things that it would bring to you guys and kind of when and why it might make sense to start adopting some of the newer generation of products. So as I started saying, we're excited to host this session. It's not often that we get the Rockwell folks on the phone and that you, our customers, can connect directly to them. I think we have several folks on the phone, and I will turn this over to them to do some titles and introductions, if you don't mind, if we can just go around the horn from a Rockwell perspective. But we have Alexis Kaskavich on the phone. Lex is our local business lead for the automation business here at Rockwell, based out of the Norristown office, if you guys have not met him before. He is on the phone, as well as several folks from Rockwell. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you if you want to start with some introductions, and then maybe the rest of the team can let our customers here know what their role is, and then we can get rolling. Oh, there we go. I guess that's a great lead in.
Oh, no problem. And thanks for that, Julia. And I thought I'd just put this on this slide so that we can have that background for it. Although for this call, this is the team that kind of put the material together. There are a select number of us that will be presenting the material today. So I'll start by introducing myself. Again, my name is Chris Dornan. I am the marketing manager within now called the Software and Control business of Rockwell, the business unit, with focus on process safety, machine safety, large control. So that includes control logics, guard logics, some of the edge platforms, as we'll talk about today, things like the Compact Logix 5480. You know, the one interesting thing, and Julia, thank you for the great job of introduction to this, is we're actually doing something a bit different if this team has been to previous roadshows, and that our intent here is to create a solution type message, as we know that a lot of times the customer buying behavior is moving from product and feature to solution and benefit. So we're actually using this message today to show how our product portfolios work together to meet the challenge of COVID and a pandemic in terms of the unique aspects and challenges that dealing with a pandemic has to the control room floor. And how do we work together across the board of understanding not only our own product portfolios, but those ones that are you know, right next door, or you know, how do we work together to create that solution that addresses that? So that'll be the highlight of and the difference you see here, and we hope that provides an added benefit to the Rumsey team here. So without me stopping, hopefully I can stop rambling here. Let me introduce the rest of the team that's at least here with us. I know Tom Jordan. Tom is out there. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Chris, everyone. This is Tom Jordan. I'm the marketing lead for Thin Manager, based in Alpharetta, Georgia, USA.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And Al?
Yeah, Letourneau, product manager for the PanaView 5000 products, working out of Milwaukee.
Great. And what we'll do here again, and again, thanks to the Rumsey team. Thanks, Julia, for getting us started. Is Joe, do you want to kind of start out? Or yeah, Joe's not with us. Joe Geigel and the other team here. I should just go back so everybody knows some of these names you're familiar with. Joe Geigel is on vacation this week. He's also a big-time member of our team that put a lot of the material together. Sue Birch is kind of text team with Joe on the visualization side. Joe has hardware and Sue has software on the visualization side. And Nick Putman is also works with Tom on the Thin Manager side as well. So appreciate all those teams, and we'll go ahead and get started. Actually, I'll cover these first couple, Al, and I'll turn it right back over to you. So how we're going to highlight our discussion and that solution message today is we're going to start talking about just what has COVID done and the impacts on how work has been done and how a control system plays into that new reality. We're going to do that through looking at new technology that's available to us, technology that allowed us to really create and craft solutions that could deal with COVID that maybe we didn't have at our disposal 5-10 years ago. And we're going to use that to bleed into the human side of things, because one thing that COVID has really had an impact is just our personal safety, how we feel safe when we go to do our jobs, and how do we as a control system vendor provide ways that we can make that workforce feel safe and be safe. So, I think when you look at that technology piece here first, and knowing a lot of these pre-existing trends have been in place, but we know that from a labor standpoint, the impact on the operators, on the engineers, even teachers, I think anybody that sees any jobs across the board where a lot of the workforce looked at just as a self-reflection during these times and said, you know what, I think I'm going to take that package or retire early. This has caused a significant change in how I'm comfortable doing business. A lot of times that is the comfort factor with dealing with computers and internet and so forth. And that did cause a big change. And we're going to talk about some of that impact of the retirement and bringing in of a new workforce and how we accommodate those changes. Obviously, from a security standpoint, the biggest attacks happen when we're at our weakest, right? So that has been something we've also seen. So how do we continue to be vigilant in terms of our solutions for cybersecurity, et cetera, when we know those attacks, that frequency of attack has increased? We talked about that human factor, so the emphasis on not only worker safety, but social distancing, through proper hygienic protocols, et cetera. And also one thing that I'm sure the Rumsey team has seen specifically is the impact that a lot of this has had on not only getting product where it needs to go, but lead times, et cetera, the impact on parts that are coming to us so that we can make particular product and getting it out. So I know that's probably an elephant in the room for a lot of the team here. I know we don't want to be insensitive to saying, we're not going to hit that. Do know that we're staying vigilant, and as we have some time towards the end of the call, we can definitely take some questions on what we're doing and how we're trying to streamline a lot of those requests through the critical situation demand room. But having our distributor family as yourselves work with customer care and provide as much information on how we can get things properly prioritized. And obviously, you guys are seeing the own impact with your own customer base and so forth. So as time, allows, as questions at the end, to share some stories on what's impacted the Rumsey operations and how we can help.
Yeah, and I'm sure many of our customers on the phone have felt the challenges of supply chain, not only, from the Rockwell portfolio, but from everywhere. So happy to discuss that at the end. And then also I would mention, anybody has any questions, feel free to chime in, open dialogue as topics come up that like what Chris is mentioning.
Thanks for that, Julia. That's an excellent point. We do want to be very informal here. You have any, and I know we're all used to Teams and raising hands, Julie. I don't know if there's a similar function here, but at any time, just unmute yourself and stop us if there is a question that we can address as we go on. I believe there is a chat function here as well that we'll try to monitor as we go through too.
Yep, I'm watching chat. If anybody has a question, wants to pop it in there, or just offer it out.
Great. And Julia, forgive me, because I know we had talked about at least introducing our team. Was there an intent, or did any of the Rumsey team want to introduce themselves? Not necessary, but I didn't want to steamroll through that.
Oh, no, it's okay, Chris. I think there's a couple of the folks from Rumsey up in the images. Mace Pittman, Steve Huck, Mike Fissner are all part of the automation team here at Rumsey. But we can keep going on. I love
Okay.
some nice black panel views on the left-hand side there. We've gone back to old. I love it.
Absolutely, and that's a good segue here as we kind of transition to how we got here. And Al, if you don't mind, I'll let you cover this slide.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess speaking of old, I was actually I've actually been around for longer than these PanaView 1200s. I've been around for previous generations prior to that too. So we're going to just give you a little bit of historical perspective here on how we got to where we are and where the term PanaView originated and what products have come along during that life cycle of the PanaView products. If you go back far enough, we had products prior to this, operator interface terminal products that weren't panel views, that were programmed in statement-oriented languages. I won't dwell on that, but that goes all the way back into the 80s. Moving into the 90s, we developed the first panel view type product, which was the 1200, which connected on remote I/O to PLC5s and PLC2s and such. That was a pretty successful product, all CRT based. Moving into the flat screen products, we had the PanaView standard products, PanaView Plus products, Plus 6, which is actually still around, PanaView Plus 7s, which are really a pretty important core product for us, and then the PanaView 5000 product that I'm the manager of. Also, the mobile view is essentially a tethered version of the PanaView Plus 7. Slide, please. If you look at the industrial computer space, again, we've been selling industrial computers since the late 80s, since DOS machines, basically, and even Unix machines prior to that. The VersaView products came into existence probably starting 15, 20 years ago. We had a pretty extensive family of those. We've since introduced the heavy-duty outdoor products, the 6181 and 6181X products. VersaView 5000s came along. We brought back that term VersaView because it had a lot of kind of staying power, and we've most recently acquired a company that gave us a huge expansion of our portfolio, which we'll be talking about a little later on, the VersaView 6300 products. So that represents just an explosion in terms of the diversity of products that we can offer and the ability for us to custom tailor a solution that gives you the right price performance. Slide, please. And if you look at this continuum between small system stuff that you might see on an individual machine or an individual skid mounted kind of system, bigger systems that span multiple controllers, and then all the way up to a distributed control system type of solution, we can really offer you any and all of these. And the beauty of it is that these can coexist and actually be parts of the same totally integrated solution. For example, you could have a skid mounted system that comes in that's got one small controller and one small operator interface terminal that could connect up to scalable HMIs that run on Windows machines. Generally, those are going to want to be industrialized Windows machines for reasons we'll explain later. And those can then become a part of a whole distributed control system run by Plant PAX. One example of how you could have those made up to one another is that with the Thin Manager product, using the VNC functions that we'll talk about a little later, you can actually serve up live video and images from an operator interface terminal through Thin Manager to a remote computer that you could actually view the real-time control functions that are being performed by an operator on that operator interface terminal and see them elsewhere in your facility or elsewhere in the world using Thin Manager. Slide, please. So
yeah, go ahead, Al.
Go ahead, Chris. You can have this one.
No worries. So, and that's an important piece. So we look at a little bit of the history, and I think the history drives us to looking at and saying, hey, technology has definitely changed. And as we know in Moore's Law, it kind of changes on a much steeper curve than it ever has. So how do we deal with that? How do we look at taking advantage of the technology from not only the controller itself, but from a lot of the devices that we'll talk about? And how do we allow that to first talk about how we can use that technology to support the new workforce, that remote workforce? Talked about the ability to make the plant continue to be safety, because we know the changes and the attacks change on a regular basis. And we can't forget about the engineers as well. So how do we continue to be efficient, knowing that labor's at a premium, both on the operator and the engineer side? And how do we make those engineers more effective? The human side, is we also talked about, can't be forgotten. And we were going to start that conversation as we get to it through that attrition that we're seeing as retirement and just baby boomers and that large swath of workers that are coming to the end of their working life, right? And a lot of those are being replaced by millennials, Gen Xers. I don't know what it is. I don't even know what I am. I'm somewhere in the middle. But that is coming out now, and they're coming out of school with different tools, different technologies, and if we don't adapt with it, it's a lot of times hard to bring in those new workforce to the control really realm, if you will. So we're going to talk about that, but at the end of the day, it's really about providing the information that people need to make the best decisions. And whether that means our connected enterprise, it's really about us. How do we continue to allow information to pass and using our knowledge to put that data in the context that people can actually use it. So when we start that, we know that working remotely is really the new normal. And I think a lot of us would say that we're probably never going to go back to where we were before this pandemic hit, based on, the ability for a lot of us to be proficient and capable by working remotely. But we know there's challenges there. IT is maybe not as close as they've always been in terms of helping us troubleshoot issues. IT wants to be there to help, but they're also charged with making sure the proper authorization is given into the system so that the system is protected. At the end of the day, though, work has to be done. So how do operators get the information they need, but not necessarily being tethered to the control room either? So, from a base standpoint, what are those options that we have as Rockwell to provide to that market space? VNC access is one. That's not something that obviously comes from Rockwell, but it is kind of common. There's a lot of players out there. And these are cases where, let's say you're at a customer location, there's not access to the internet, or it's prohibited for certain reasons. And you want to be able to, from any station, be able to get to the HMI or the screens across the plant. Obviously, VNC is the way to do that. The viewers are a lot of times free. Important for us that we have the server capability. And Al's going to talk a little bit more when we get to the Panel View Plus and the Panel View 5000 on that connection there. Typically, both the VNC access and as we move to Viewpoint, those are built and typically used for read-only capabilities, but they can be set up for full control if needed. If you move towards the center there, the Viewpoint is kind of a step forward in that it takes advantage of a web client. So if you're at a facility that has that access, this would be a good way to go. We've had Factory Talk Viewpoint out there for a while. It allows us to translate any HMI screen that's been built into the system to a mobile client, if you will, tablet, smartphone, etc. You also have the ability to create web-only screens, maybe that you want to create as a dashboard, or maybe specific to a tablet that you want to move around with. It's a little bit of an eye chart, but the smartphone that you see there is showing an optimized alarm summary that is part of Viewpoint that has been a big attraction to that. Convenient way, again, as operators need to be untethered from the plant floor, the ability to acknowledge alarms, etc., and have that a little bit of control at the hands in a condensed way to look at alarms. That's a way to do it. And again, a lot of times used for read-only, but it does have the capability for full control as well. Moving to the right, if you want to think of on the highest level, is everything we do from a Thin Manager perspective. The content delivery, when you talk about being able to dock screens, be able to move screens, take ownership, move to where you need to be. I'm not even going to do it justice, so I won't. I'm not going to steal Tom's thunder, but as we go through the rest of this presentation, it'll be important to note all the power that's gained by that marriage of Thin Manager with Rockwell here. As a Rockwell steward, and I'm sure this is not a surprise for everyone, to really get this ball rolling, we know that the information passing has to start with getting access to data. And that still for us is married to Logix. But we do take care of and take advantage of technology in this space. We know that the instrumentation or our own assets like drives and MCCs have grown in the years to provide more information. We don't just have a 4 to 20 milliamp signal. We get health, we get diagnostics. The Anderson-Hauser flow transmitter that you see kind of in the middle top, when connected on Ethernet IP, and connection is a big piece that obviously we have to be open to talk, and Ethernet has really become more prevalent, but talking the process networks like HART, being able to talk to upcoming standards like MQTT and OPCUA is also important, and things that we have at our capability. But just looking at that transmitter on Ethernet IP, you may have 2,000 pieces of information now that come from that device. As we know, 2,000 pieces of information is way too much and would inundate anybody. But really where we have to provide the value is how we contextualize that information in the right way to the right user. And one way we've done that is through a library of faceplates and graphic objects, similar to the faceplate you see on the top right, which is for a PowerFlex 755. For us, the development of this library was crucial, especially when you think about being able to have Plant PAX have some teeth to it. But this is an important way that we provide that user-based interface and provide information contextualized to that user. So it defaults to the operator. So things that are critical to starting, stopping, seeing the permissives or interlocks on a drive would be shown here. But and if you look closely, you see that there are other tabs, one that's meant for the engineer, one for the maintenance user. So again, having a personalized feel and specific information contextualized to those users and protected through login privileges to get to those, at least to be able to access those tabs to make changes. So it's putting the right information in the right context to the right user. Also important for us has been the prevalence of automatic diagnostics. And what that means is the ability for the hardware to automatically publish diagnostic and health conditions immediately to the alarm, in this case, the alarm summary, alarm banners. So you don't have to create code to create watchdogs to look for those diagnostic conditions to happen, that it will automatically populate as necessary to it, which again goes to that reducing complexity, allowing the engineers to be more efficient. And I know, Al, that speaks explicitly to what we're doing with Panel View 5000 as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You know, it's reasonable to assume that if you buy the controller from a company and you buy a drive from the same company and the I/O from the same company, a motor control center, a soft start, what have you, that those products would have some kind of awareness of one another, some kind of consciousness of one another. And at Rockwell, we're fulfilling that promise with this automatic diagnostics function, so that if you have a, say, an I/O channel or a soft start go bad on phase loss or what have you, it'll send a signal that actually publishes through the controller and then just shows up on the screen of the Panel View 5000 without any programming at all. Now that's a version 8 function. It won't be out for a couple of months, but it's all tested and ready to go. We're just getting it packaged up at this point. So automatic diagnostics will be out by the end of this calendar year. And at that point, if you do have all the latest hardware and all the latest firmware loaded into it, you'll have the benefit of that automatic diagnostic functionality without any programming at all. We already mentioned VNC. That's a built-in function of the PanaView 5000 products and the PanaView Plus 7s as well. And it, again, like I said earlier, allows you to view the actual activity on the terminal screen that's being performed by the operator. And if your security policies view it as appropriate, you can actually remotely operate the thing too by just clicking on buttons with your mouse elsewhere on the network. And again, that can be remoted and encrypted through the Thin Manager product as well. And then if you're really truly remote and you need to do upload download to a distant site, you can do that over VPN. The actual upload download utility will downshift if you're on a slow VPN connection, so it doesn't time out. You can download the configuration of the terminal, you know, the buttons and switches and graphic displays and such, and also the firmware. And if the download utility detects that a firmware upgrade is needed, it'll download that automatically for you, and then follow that with a download of the configuration. And if you can't even get to it that way, either because they're just not physically connected or because, again, you got a firewall issue or what have you, you can ship someone an SD card or a thumb drive and they can load it without even having a PC present at the site.
So Thin Manager supports your remote diagnostics and monitoring in several ways. One of the first ways is reducing the overall cybersecurity footprint. So where you're able to replace traditional PCs with thin clients, you're also able to remove an extra OS that has to be maintained, and which can also cause unplanned downtime. Thin Manager also allows for easy remote monitoring of terminals. Al and Chris both mentioned the VNC capabilities within Thin Manager. We call this our shadowing feature inside of Thin Manager. And we can shadow not only any terminal from the administrative interface in Thin Manager, but we can also allow one terminal to shadow another so that workers on the plant floor could share information from one terminal to another with each other as well. And again, with Thin Manager, all that VNC communication is encrypted. We can send notifications to a phone number, an email, an SMS text message when needed. When your PC does go down, you can again replace these thin client devices that Thin Manager manages in just a few minutes versus what a traditional PC would be, because again, there's no local storage and no local data that has to be replaced or reconfigured. You're simply just plugging in a new terminal and sending that configuration for download from the Thin Manager server. If you have a multi-server deployment, and that could be multiple servers on a single site or multiple servers across multiple sites, we make it easy to manage multiple Thin Manager installations. Each Thin server, which is where the Thin Manager data is stored, can be centrally managed from a Thin Manager interface. And then finally, if you need a unified mobile experience, you can display any of the applications that Thin Manager serves up to PCs or Thin clients. You can also serve those up to mobile applications, and we have apps that support Windows, Android, and iOS mobile operating systems.
So as we look at that, and Tom, thanks for that piece, and that technology has really driven some capabilities here that really help in these times. But as we said, obviously that when we're down in times of pandemic, when we have to be extra vigilant in terms of cybersecurity, and it's obviously that second side of the sword, right, of being able to pass information to help do our jobs better, but that does open up windows for attack, right? So those threats change, as we know, every day. So what works today not necessarily protects us from what happens tomorrow. And unfortunately, sometimes as we go back to proper authorization in the system, is that there are threats that happen from the inside as well. And it's not just the single hackers or cyber criminals. You go the whole way up to state-based coordinated attacks. So, how do we deal with this? And I think it's still an answer where we have a defense in depth procedure, because we know we can't really go back to living on an island. You can't air gap everything. Sometimes we may have to do that as we work into critical infrastructure and military engagements. But still, the benefit of that information passing is really important. So, we want to be able to provide the best of both worlds, is to keep that information going, but having ways that you're protected. And in a way, we put all that into really one sentence, and that's, how do we allow IT and OT to work together to secure a network? And Tom, I think that's a huge piece of where Thin Manager comes in here.
That's right, Chris. We believe that IT and OT convergence is the key to solving many of the current issues that we have security related in manufacturing. And again, this is something that was happening before COVID, but certainly COVID has accelerated this need for IT and OT to be able to work together. So in the Thin Manager world, we just approach this in a very simple way. Thin Manager syncs with the Active Directory that IT is going to be controlling and running. And essentially, Thin Manager gives IT control over anything with the IP address. And then those assets, after they're blessed by IT and the network is locked down and secure, can easily be distributed to whoever needs them based on the person's role, based on where they are in the plant and what they're doing, based on what terminal they're at. So Thin Manager gives the OT side of the group, again, that freedom to do what they need to do to get things done, to be more productive without involving IT every single time. So it's that way for, again, IT to see that we can give our blessing to this kind of technology, and then OT, again, has the freedom to work more freely in their own environment. Next slide, please. So we're also taking these steps in our own portfolios to try to get things that work together more cohesively. And so our relevance users, again, we talked about how they sync with Active Directory. Those access groups and permissions are all passed down. And so we can use that information to pass that information through to a FactoryTalk View SE session. And so we can allow FactoryTalk View SE now to have multi-factor authentication because Thin Manager supports several devices that allow you to expand how one might authenticate to the network. And then we automatically pass that authentication through to the FactoryTalk View session. So it's a very seamless single sign-on type of experience between those portfolio products.
Tom, you had mentioned on a previous slide about reducing the attack footprint, and that's a key part of what Thin Manager offers. It's also something that is addressed through some of our edge portfolio. Why this is definitely an issue is I think we've all seen that any white box PCs that were used for computing on the plant floor are being removed and prohibited from getting back there. And a lot of times that's just because of the effort and security that has to be built in into tethering those white box PCs to the network. It may not be as bad as this guy here in front of just miles and miles of spider webs of cable, but it could be managing firewalls, unmanaged, managed switches, etc., which becomes very problematic and costly, right? So the intent is how do we, because we obviously you're getting rid of the white box PC, but that doesn't mean that you can't take advantage of computing and PC capabilities in general. How do you just get that capability, but move that PC closer to, in our case, Logix? The Edge portfolio is what really bridges that gap. So two products, well, actually three products, because you look at our IPCs that we've continued to go to market with, VersaViews, et cetera. But the marriage of Logix and a PC two ways. One through the 1756 compute module that has been out there a bit longer. It's where you have a control Logix, really a computer within a card that would be in the same chassis as a controller. And you also have the capability of the Compact Logix 5480, which was introduced about 2 years ago. And the first product as a single box that has Logix and an onboard operating system, which is the Windows 10 IoT Enterprise OS, which we'll talk to in a bit later. And there is some capabilities and some added functionality of looking at that edge platform as we go through the rest of this presentation. But again, the importance here is, sometimes you think about addressing security just in its native form. And sometimes that's just, how do you just get rid of a lot of locations of where you have to add security, where you could just remove that altogether. So it's definitely a way that we want to address this from a holistic standpoint.
I think that's an interesting thought, Chris. We have talked over the last couple of years with a lot of our customers about computing, but never in the thought process of just simply reducing your footprint and what that might do for it. I know a lot of our customers on the phone are Compact Logix customers. They have a lot of Compact Logix in use today. Have any of you guys looked at the 5480 with the built-in PC? Just curious if anybody has given that any consideration before, or maybe it's new to you, the thought of that. I'll probably take silence as no. I do see one in chat that no, it's new to them. I had a feeling. So we've talked a little bit about it, but it's been a little slow to create a lot of visibility around. So, okay, that's an interesting thought for Compact Logix users. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, don't apologize, Julia. I'll bring you on. I appreciate your help. We can tag team this together for added benefit for sure. And you bring up a great point.
Security's near and dear to my heart. So I'm interested in this one too with the 5,000.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just for everybody's information too is, think about Julia's question a little bit. It is something we can obviously go back to, and we actually have on the closing slide some locations where you can find out more about our Edge platform. And it is important for us because it's a story where sometimes it's hard to sell the technology. We're building up a lot of customer use cases on, and we'll talk about one here in a little bit, of what are typical of the value propositions, or where have similar customers used this Edge portfolio for their benefit, right? So it's more marrying a value proposition through how somebody else has used the technology, and we continue to build upon that. But there is a security element to it that's critical. And explicitly, Julia, when you had mentioned the PanelView 5000, there is explicit pieces here that are important to talk about. The compatibility with the ability to bring in USB connected RFID devices. So you have that kind of biometric piece, using login with wristbands or badges, et cetera. We actually have a knowledge-based article that speaks in detail about that. But you talk about the user administration in terms of having up to 500 unique user accounts, plus a guest user. And obviously protection on how you make those classes read write, read only, or no access, and the ability to auto log out so that you don't necessarily have to always remember, to log out when you're done, but being able to auto log out to protect the terminal from, improper authorization into the system. We're going to talk about Windows 10 IoT Enterprise as capability in some of our edge portfolio. It's important to note that actually the PanelView 5000 has an option where it does not use Windows. And sometimes that's important too, obviously because, a lot of people are used to obviously using a PC with Windows to do what they need to do. Not having Windows and using other operating systems like Linux really eliminates a lot of times the risk of viruses and hackers because of a not as a intuitive way to get into the system as it is sometimes with Windows. And at the end of the day, regardless, there is extensive testing on the product like the PanelView 5000, using standards from the ODVA organization themselves to make this as robust as we can. As we continue to move on through the technology portion here, let's not forget about the engineers, as we talked about before, because in times of COVID, there's an impact. We said already about that impact on labor and the capability of engineers. A lot of the engineers are retiring, and new engineers coming out of schools are blessed with certain talents that we have to be aware of. But at the end of the day, we already talked about life cycles. We want it yesterday and we want it fast. How do we continue to support a scalable solution that allows us to be cost effective, having just enough and just for me as we tackle all of these to you, the customers on this call as well? And how do we support our channels so that they can enter in at times their own intellectual property, but using the basis so that when you have a system, it looks like Rockwell, regardless of the go-to-market strategy, either internally or through our external channels and system integrators. We know that now a lot of this has to be done virtually, even this discussion today, and we're going to look forward to when we're back being able to do these in person, because a lot of times we don't want to PowerPoint you to death, obviously, and being in person has a lot of merit, and a lot of times being able to bring product and getting your hands on it is important. We are going to provide information at the end of this presentation on how to get your hands on some of the demos, though, as well. Now, how do we do all this when you think about being able to do more with less and really having that benefit in terms of efficiency to get you up and running? And a lot of times the answer is not a new one for us. And that is the fact is a strength of how we go to market as Rockwell Automation is through our integrated architecture. Now, conventional approaches a lot of times in this space and why they can become problematic from a labor standpoint is, and I know I cut my teeth on Foxborough IA on a DCS perspective for process control. When I needed to do fast, high-speed control, I'd have to then obviously communicate to an Allen Bradley PLC. So you have kind of two processors, and you could even see based on the type of approaches and disciplines you have, you could have a processor for each type, which may have its own software package, its own set of programming languages, and needing a dedicated workforce to be able to use each of those. You contrast that to our integrated architecture, where it's a story of Logix being capable, multi-discipline. That beauty of doing process through discrete, including motion, including safety, and doing that with Studio 5000 so that regardless of the discipline that you're using, the look and feel of how to code it is the same. And having full language support across the board. Again, another story from Foxborough was, I know we had ladder, but it wasn't as capable as the function block within the system. So, you had to kind of pick and choose a little bit, whereas obviously in Logix, we have full support across the board for all the, the languages that are used in control. And it probably, when it all comes down to it, the ability to cross-train personnel on one system, especially beneficial when your workforce is affected like it is in times of a pandemic. And Believe me, I have Rockwell in my title, right? So I have my Rockwell hat on, and I know that this is important, but we continue to get quotations, and we can't forget the fact is, it's just this is a native part of how we go to market. And sometimes we forget the value from a total cost of ownership perspective of being able to own everything from the control through the glass to the ERP and MES layers, as we're going to continue to talk about as we move forward here. Now, explicitly with the PanelView 5000 and the View Designer software, there is a lot of work that's been done so that we build that value proposition of using Rockwell holistically, because we know that we're getting attacked from third-party HMIs and ways where, why don't we just sell a Rockwell controller and we'll sell something else on top of it, right? But you lose some of the capability of obviously native logics integration. No needing to import or re-enter information. There is that live link between both the Logix program and View Designer. You really have that integrated design environment with the PanelView 5000 and View. It's really giving us kind of a template as we look to continue to develop our integrated design environment across the board. But that direct access, the flexible tools, the ability to auto scale screens so that you don't have to worry about resizing. That library of elements so that things like a pump looks like a pump and a valve looks like a valve. How do you marry the HMI screens to what an operator sees on the plant floor? That's very important. And then I think last but not least is that capability of alarming, where we know before you never want to be in a situation where you create a tag and then have to create another instance for the alarm of that tag. So being able to automatically do that once, and building alarm messages on the fly that automatically get populated to the alarm banners. And the greatest strength of using Rockwell together is, let's say you do go down, that buffering of information so that when you come back online, you're not losing that alarm information, where you may be vulnerable to that by using a third-party HMI on top of a Rockwell controller, if you will. Let's say message is prevalent through our View, our Factory Talk View program as well, our software here. You talk about the ability, again, of removing any gaps that we've had previously. And again, one of those gaps was creating a tag, creating an alarm reference, but now having that capability of doing everything once. We're creating a tag and then having the option to set its alarm properties right there. You talk about that multi-user development environment. And I'll tell you one thing that, again, has been native to what we do, but sometimes not easily discussed, is just the context of how we provide information. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say that you have a valve, per se, and a valve is, let's keep it pretty simple. You open and you close it. But information like the valve, like, times of open, how far it's been opened, is there problems with the limit switch? Is there items of hysteresis that get up on the information level to know where you create a work audit report so that someone goes down and fixes it. With Rockwell, you keep that context of a valve throughout. So obviously in Studio 5000, you have the logical designer where you can associate your tags and programs with a unit of equipment like a valve or a mixer. On the screen itself, then you have global objects that are built for a valve. So, the open limit switch, the closed limit switch, the alarming, all of that that's typically used for a valve is contained within that object and faceplate. Then as you marry on to, owning the glass allows you access into the information space where you keep that context of a valve. So you get that data like hysteresis, and it's not just some strange string that has no merit or connection to where you'd be thinking about it. It's still within the context of the valve itself or the name of that valve. So information continues to be intuitive by aligning that tag information to a singular piece of equipment. And that is a native piece for Rockwell that we differentiate through. Now, Tom, how about Thin Manager explicitly in this case?
Sure, Chris. So design also includes compute efficiency. And so in Thin Manager 12, we're happy to introduce the web container technology. So this allows, in a simple way to understand it, just like we use virtualization to virtualize server hardware to virtual servers, that many servers can be used on one piece of hardware. It's the same kind of thought when we talk about application containers, except instead of an entire OS, this is just a very small technology wrapper that wraps the application, and we can deliver that application to hosted terminals, just like we can other content. Next slide, please. The beauty of this is that these containers don't have to be hosted on a central server. They can actually be hosted on the end clients themselves. So these containers use very little resource, compute resource. And so now with the ability with Thin Manager, we can send the host files for these web apps, if you will, for this web hosting container, to be hosted on an actual thin client, and then other thin clients can view that content from the thin client. So next slide, please. So an example of this would be, how, what do we use to deploy? So think of all the things in the Rockwell portfolio, or any other portfolio for that matter, that's web-based. That content can now be containerized and delivered virtually anywhere. And the beauty of this is it doesn't require remote desktop services for Thin Manager to make this container delivery. So it can save a little bit on licensing. And with that web browser container being able to be hosted on clients, when a customer decides to set up something like web dashboards, for instance, they don't necessarily have to set up new server resources to support that technology. They can take advantage of existing devices to actually host that content and help control the delivery.
Thanks for that, Tom. And again, I think that's a nice closure for the technology aspect and just allowing that content to be deployed. So it's, how do we make things more intuitive? How do we give everybody the powers necessary without worrying about where to go to and what services you have to get there? As we transition now to the human side of things, we know that, again, the first thing that happens and that we've seen from COVID is a big impact on the workforce. We look at the baby boomers and the effect and just how we're dealing it. And if you just look domestically, 10,000 Americans are turning 65 every day. And actually, as we go to 2024, that number is going to increase to more than 12,000. Partially due to COVID, and a lot of times just in the last couple of years, you talk about the baby boomers as a big portion of our workforce and the population. They're retiring at twice the rate they had just a couple of years ago. And, that impact is seen of, really putting that shortage of skilled manufacturing workers, right? And that need's just not going to go away. It's just going to get worse. And I think we all see that across the board. I mean, even just as simple as, I don't know if I go to any fast food restaurant around right now, and I can't find one that doesn't have a help wanted sign out there. So you just talk about across the board, even from a control element to have operators, it's a tough time right now. So what do we do to combat that generational change? Because what we do know is that when these skilled workforce is leaving, you're going to have to get that workforce somewhere. And a lot of times that's what those our young people are graduating colleges from, graduating high school from. And they're not graduating with the same skills, or not even in a negative way, just different skills, using latest technology that we have to adapt to. So when you look at that, from just a product perspective, if you look at the PanelView 5000, I think one of the cool things is you just look at the left there. I think we've all known, and Apple has that knack, and others, to say what becomes very intuitive for usage. And a lot of times on any kind of smart device, we just look for the bottom of that little home tab if we need to do something. And it's the same thing with the PanelView 5000, is you have that button at the bottom, which brings up an intuitive user experience, and it resembles that button, and it does call up a configurable navigation menu, similar to what you'd expect when you have a smartphone. We talked about that element of design, but again, continuing to match the graphic elements on the screen to the physical counterpart allows more intuitive control, so that, a pump looks like a pump and a valve looks like a valve. So if there's some real-time knowledge of what has to happen to make product fall through a system, you want to look for those same kind of icons on an HMI screen. That helps. But at the end of the day, too, the system is equipped with ways where you can get detailed information on system status and alarms, intuitive help screens, a PDF viewer that you can use to display work functions, or you can actually have the terminal itself send an email out for help as needed. How about from a Thin Manager perspective, Tom? I mean, this is also a big piece here.
Sure, Chris. We see a lot of change in the workforce, and two of the main things we see is people are getting younger and teams are getting smaller. And so That younger generation, you know, they have some expectations, like multiple monitors. I remember the first time I got my second monitor years ago. I thought, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. And now it's just an expectation that you have at least two monitors, right? And some people have more than that. And so Thin Manager, again, makes it real easy to deploy and display content across multiple monitors on any device, giving that easy access to information, which again is expected by that younger generation. Easily switching between applications and having applications move around where you go, and the ability to quickly share screens and share information. Again, these are the kind of things that are just expected by the younger workforce coming into play now. And then with smaller teams, features like our shadowing ability, where they can share information from one terminal to another, and our easy to use mobility options. Again, you can now deploy applications the same way they run on the PCs and the thin clients. They can be deployed to the mobile devices without rewriting any code, and it can be done very quickly.
Tom, what's interesting is that you may think of some of that from an operator perspective, but the new operators are also graduating with the new engineers. And a lot of times, and I think we could all understand that today's engineers graduating from school aren't necessarily proficient or trained in function block programming or ladder or structured text. More so, you see skills in Python or JSON or Java or even C++. So one kind of unique piece, and this kind of goes back to the Edge portfolio we talked about just briefly a little whiles back, is one thing with the Edge portfolio, and actually the compute module, the 1756 compute module, it actually uses an API that interrogates the controller through the backplane and has access to 40 or so instructions within Logix. Now, to step back and say, okay, well, what does that really mean? Well, that gives me the capability where I can attach and be able to have a PC or a compute capability, be able to create some unique algorithms. And how we do that is C++ could be used to build, a unique piece of code that could then work with Logix itself to, close a loop in a unique way. And we have a partner that translates C++ into Python, JSON, Java, and others, so that you really have a future where you could take advantage of those skill sets of the engineers that develop code in Python per se, or C++, and allow that talent to be used to actually create unique algorithms to do logic within Logix itself. So, modern new problems can have modern answers based on the skill set of the engineers that are graduating right now, which is a huge piece. And as we continue again to look at that, from moving from generational attrition to just allowing people in general to feel safe, regardless of the age, regardless of where you're at in your career path, we know that this has probably been one of the things where it's easy to think about the impact that COVID has had on us. It's definitely brought out times where we have to think about how socially distant we are. And a lot of times, how is that done within an environment where maybe the control room doesn't allow that to happen? Or how do we, hygienically, clean environments between uses? And a lot of that is problems that we're going to continue to see. And how do we, as a control system vendor, help play in that space? Now, if you just look at hygienics per se to start, it goes to our product itself and having options that go to like IP69K for some of those critical, wash downs that have to happen in certain environments, and product that stands up to it for that sterilization. So we have different options, and we're going to talk some more about it at the end, about all the options that we're building out in the HMI hardware here. But you have those panel view pluses and stainless steel, the 7s, that can withstand that direct spray. We have stainless versions that are coming for the 5510 and the VersaView 6300, which again, 6300 marries to our acquisition of Awesome, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But just in terms of having capabilities where you can be socially distant as well. So using pendants or using things like mobile view, you see at the bottom, where you can space out operators where they need to be. And last but not least here is maybe there's certain locations that are just in general hazardous for anybody to be at, but you need an eye, if you will, on that location. So in the actually what's coming in the version 8 that I know that Julia had mentioned in the chat here. So within the upcoming version 8 with the panel view 5510, you have that ability to bring in video from IP cameras to allow that visibility maybe in those dangerous locations. That could be very important. But that's not it. I mean, Thin Manager obviously offers some benefit to this socially distancing as well, Tom.
Sure, absolutely. So Thin Manager supports things like the IP camera feeds and ways of remote viewing, just like Chris was talking about. We also allow our customers to easily redeploy devices. So during these challenging times where social distancing has become important, some of our customers have had to turn single centralized control rooms into multi-room control rooms. And with Thin Manager, they're not having to re-engineer all of those control rooms. They really just redeploy screens to different computers, different terminals. So it makes it very easy, again, a redeployment instead of a reconfiguration when the geography has to be changed in your facility. Of course, shadowing terminals, we've mentioned on almost every slide, is one of the most used features and most talked about features from our customers. You can also assign content to a user based on their role. This can be helpful, again, when perhaps things have changed inside on the plant floor, things maybe have moved around or a little bit different. By assigning content to users, no matter what terminal a user authenticates to, they'll receive the applications that they're supposed to have. Again, that's like mobile applications that follow you around, even without a mobile device. And then finally, one of the things that Thin Manager can be easily used to do is deploy additional signage. It's nothing to hook up an extra monitor to any terminal anywhere on the Thin Manager network and just have a simple electronic sign. Again, for these times in COVID and social distancing, pop-up signage is a very important thing, and being able to do it with a product you already own is a good way to go.
Absolutely, Tom. And I'm not socially distant from my dog. He's actually right close to me. So if you hear strange noises coming from my computer, just know that there's a reason for it. Okay, so as we continue to look at the human side of things, just being able to have uptime, and I'm going to go back to Tom here because I remember when we first brought in Thin Manager as a part of Rockwell, the intuitive way of going to market and really thinning out the architecture and from a design efficiency standpoint was huge, Tom, and I think no better than you to speak towards this.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So this is our bread and butter. It's really about eliminating as much downtime as possible. So we're going to focus on that middle area there. In traditional PCs, you have an OS, you have apps, perhaps there's virus software. Of course, there's moving parts like hard drives or fans, mass storage device access. These are kind of things PCs have, and every PC on your plant floor will have all these things that have to be maintained, updated, changed, patched, even corrected in some cases. So the idea in the Thin Manager world is to take those OSs and consolidate them to just a few centralized virtual servers, if you will, or physical servers, depending on what how you want to configure that and engineer it. But then redeploy that content to devices like thin clients and mobile tablets, because no longer is a dedicated operating system needed on that end terminal. And so by removing that operating system, we remove a lot of the troublesome aspects of that terminal. Of course, there are no moving parts or things to fail inside of these thin client terminals, and they can be replaced in just a couple of minutes. And then again, any content you're deploying through Thin Manager to those terminals can also be easily deployed to the mobile devices in your facility as well. And then finally, the last thought we want to leave you with on Thin Manager is managed thin clients. Is the difference between thin client hardware that's unmanaged and hardware that is managed. So when a customer decides they want to go the thin client route, it's important to understand that managing those terminals is really the key to the savings. And Thin Manager is a tool that does that. So on their own, those devices are more secure because they don't have local storage and things like that. But Thin Manager does things like closing down USB ports and mass storage access by default, and that has to be opened one terminal at a time from the administrator. Again, easy to replace the units. The units usually take up less room and require less power than other units. So if these have to go into enclosures, there's a lot less trouble with thin clients and enclosures, again, than traditional machines that may create more of a cooling situation or challenge. And then again, finally, there's just fewer client operating systems to manage. And this is the number one reason to go with thin client technology, is to remove the number of operating systems that have to be managed and that can offer cybersecurity issues.
Thanks for that, Tom. And Tom, if you didn't mind, I don't know if you saw the question that came in through chat, and some of this will go to Al. I don't know if Al's back yet on here, but Al will be hopefully back on with us shortly, could speak explicitly. And I know we can talk explicitly about the Windows CE 6X that's not supported in terms of what we're doing now. So we have an answer for that. Hopefully Al gets back on. I'll turn that over. But you know, there was a question, Tom, in terms of using the VNC connection with Thin Manager for view only. I don't know if you saw that second half of the question.
I am looking at that now. Let's see, use VNC connection with Thin Manager for view only operator engineer. Yeah, so that can be view only, or it can be interactive. That is up to the Thin Manager administrator how that is set, and again, that can be assigned based on role. So an operator could have view only access, while when a manager logs into the same terminal, we would offer them interactive access to the shadow or the VNC.
Thanks for that, Tom. And again, the question on the transition from CE6, I'm going to let Al speak to that, and he should be back on within just a couple minutes here. And if not, we'll make sure that Al takes that question. And if you don't mind, the person, I think I have that asked that question, Samuel, we'll make sure, Samuel, you get that answer, and we'll populate that to the team if Al's not able to jump back on with us before we end the call. While Tom was talking about the managed thin clients, it's, again, part of our edge portfolio, the Versa views that allow for that hosting, in that case, of multiple thin client sessions as needed. But just pictorially, we talked about the Compact Logix 5480 as that all-in-one package. That's what you see in the top left here. And also the 1756 compute module is what's shown on the top right, which is basically that computer that slides in one of the locations on the rack. But as we said, there's advantages here in terms of security of removing tethered white box PCs. There's also an opportunity here to kind of really sell a solution as a product, if you will, because if we look at this next slide, the ability to properly bundle software with hardware is a unique value proposition here. And we talked about that these value props are what drive the business. One of which here is we've seen that one customer that has a vision camera, they've used the edge portfolio for anomaly detection. So they have product running down a conveyance line and a vision system with a camera that's used to look at what passes through that conveyance, and they can use and see what the thickness is. They can look for anomalies, et cetera. And that information passes so quick that you're taking advantage of an edge platform, which not only kind of is good for security, but the closer you get that PC to Logix, the faster timestamp that you can get. And sometimes the modern needs require a higher fidelity in terms of timestamp that we can provide here. Windows 10 IoT, the enterprise, is something that we actually worked with to a point with Microsoft, because it is a hardened Windows. It was built so that you don't have to have it connected for updates, that you can get 10 years without having that connection. And that's a value to that. And we also are looking as how we use Linux right now in the compute module in the 1756. We have a 32-bit version of Linux. We hope in the fall, we're planning a Series B that will have a 64-bit version of Linux in that as well. But important for us as we continue to bundle the right hardware with the right software, we're going to have to do the characterization of that so that we leverage that portfolio in knowing that what's the limiter. We're going to properly bundle software at a certain strategy so that the performance of the product is known. So that's something we're going to take on that will help as we deliver this. One way we're doing that uniquely is leveraging selling the 5480 with a one-year version in software of the FactoryTalk Edge Gateway, which is explicitly going to allow native connection to OPC UA. So just as an example, that's something we're doing to properly leverage a bundle on our Edge portfolio here. Thank you. I know we're going a little bit over time here. I apologize for that. And if we are losing anybody, I do thank you for your time that you've spent with us to date. We are closing with just a couple slides here on some new term and some latest things that we've done on the visualization hardware side. Al, are you perhaps back on the line yet?
Yeah, I am. I can grab these.
Great. Thanks, Al.
Thank you. And I'm going to give you a few slides here on some recent expansions to our portfolio of industrial computers that are represented by this VersaView 6300 line. Probably a year and a half ago now, we closed the purchase of a acquisition in Italy that develops and markets and sells industrial PCs, primarily in the European market, but we brought a lot of those products over here for sale in the US, and it's really expanded our capabilities for giving customers custom tailored solutions that hit their price performance ratio that they're looking for in packaging concepts and so on, right in the bullseye. So a few things quickly here. We've got box PCs, as you see in the center of the screen, came out in the middle of 20, about a year ago now. We've got wall mount PCs. We've got both the book mount and the wall mount type that you see, panel PCs down below. Slide, please. And moving through this most recent year and into calendar 22, that should say, or Q4 of calendar 21, I should say. We've moved into a configure to order functionality where you can buy from any of 100,000 different versions of these different products. And in fact, that is going to continue to expand pretty much geometrically. If you ever see the catalog strings on these products, they look more like the catalog string of an MCC bucket or a drive where they're like 30 characters long because there's so many different options that you can get pre-configured. Given the sheer quantity of those and the variety of those, we configure them to order and build those to order. But those products include things like the dual screen box PC that you see down at the bottom. Though that's a dual display thin client. Stainless steel panel PC just came out for life sciences and food and beverages operations, where you have a resistive grid plastic screen with a true flat front end that doesn't have harboring points for bacteria. We're doing a long distance version where you've got a higher powered driver that can drive a display that's physically distant up to 100 meters from the unit, the actual computer. Line of monitors that'll be coming out. We'll be talking about those more on machine, both in terms of a Visa mount and on a swing arm. And then we're going to continue to expand our configured order variants out through the end of this year and into calendar 22. Slide, please.
Yeah. And now, if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about this, but there was a chat question that came in a little bit ago. I don't know if you have access to the chat that, and I know for this session with customers, I don't think we'll have that specific slide, but there was a question in terms of the WinCE6X transition that if you want to highlight, and we're going to go through these next slides because you've already kind of hit on a high level. I think the one piece here on the 6300B box PC is the advantage of being able to do dual boots here. You know, you can run applications locally or use as a thin client. I don't know if you want to hit on that at all out here.
Sure, I can talk about that. These products come with what's called a Pixie boot or a PXE boot, where you can boot them either as a thin manager client node or as a full-on Windows node. And you can even switch back and forth with an individual unit if you have different requirements at different times as you upgrade your facilities or do make other kind of changes and migrations. So yeah, these can either run a Windows IoT 10 service pack, or they can run the thin manager and client node, either one.
And Tom, I believe that's important because you can kind of go back and forth, right? So if you want something to play as kind of a local station, but then be part of the solution later, right? I mean, there's a lot of beauty here.
Sure, Chris, you can go back and forth, and you can also, if you're running it in PC mode, again, I mentioned earlier, we have WinTMC, which is our mobile PC application that can actually be installed, you know, not only on like a Windows Surface tablet, but on a traditional PC, and allow Thin Manager to deliver content while that PC is operating as a PC. So it's really however you want it. You can have PC only, thin client only, or it can be a thin client and a PC at the same time.
And that can also give you options for fault tolerance. If you have a case where you lose communication to the broader network, you can run it locally if need be.
It's a great point. Thanks, Al. And again, some other versions that Al highlighted here, you know, a version of this box PC that has a kind of a higher functioning processor here. You know, it can go from an i3, i5, i7 capability here, jumbo frame, wake on LAN functionality. Al, anything specific on here? I'd keep moving.
You can keep moving.
And obviously a different version here that has a little bit of a bigger footprint, so it can be offered at a little bit of a better cost point here, I know.
Right, and all of these have a single board construction, so there's minimized connectors that don't tarnish or shake loose. So they're all got better shock and vibe characteristics as well. Keep going.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Panel
Obviously, the
PCs,
panel.
we have a line of monitors, of course, that function as monitors do traditionally, but we also got a line of panel PCs where all of the smarts and so on are all built into a single package. So we're introducing these monitors and panel PCs gradually over the last few months and over the next few as well.
Yep, and that's huge because again, we saw about those operators in that next generation. So, having analog resistive but projected capacitive screen capability for multi-touch is obviously things that are being asked in terms of our visualization portfolio that we drive and have that capability for.
Right, and it's great to have both options because PCAP does allow you to have that multi-touch, gestures, swipe, pinch, zoom, so on. But then there are other applications where customers can't have a glass front on them, like in food and bev, for example. So it's nice to have options for both. So here you see the panel PCs that are currently available. We've got the analog resistive USB aluminum one with the IP65, 66, aluminum and glass PCAP that's IP66, so it can be more tolerant of incoming water without having ingress. We got the true flat analog resistive 65 and a 69K that just was introduced, which you can put a direct hose down without any risk of water ingress as well.
Excellent, definitely.
We're working on machine devices that'll be out later this calendar year, both on a swing arm and visa mount. They come with an optional row of pilot devices. So if you wanted to have e-stop switch, for example, or start-stop push buttons and such connected directly to that on the swing arm, we're going to offer that later this year.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was maybe another one there, but that's.
Sorry, for that last one, I'm sorry, are those coming with the arms?
I think the arm will be available as a separate optional kit that you can buy.
Okay, but they're ready, they're monitors that have the appropriate holes ready for mounting on something like that. Is that what I'm understanding?
Those are existing products from that acquisition.
Okay.
This is more a matter of getting all the documentation, all the fulfillment processes all worked out than it is an engineering task, frankly. Some of these products have been a little bit delayed just due to the fact that they were partially completed in their engineering cycle before we made the acquisition and started to make the moves. But most of these products are existing products that we can bring over. We just have to work out all the delivery and documentation and support.
Okay.
Thanks for that question, Julia. Al, did you see that question that came in chat? I know
No,
that you.
I can't see the chat history. I opened chat and it's blank.
Let me ask you the question then. I'll ask it to you. So, the question was the Panel View Plus 7 Win CE 6X to Windows 10 IoT transition.
Right. As people might be aware, the Panel View Plus 7 products have historically run Windows CE 6. And while that is a very secure platform, Microsoft has understandably terminated patches for that. They're not carrying that along and continuing to introduce patches for it. So a number of customers have expressed concern that in the future we could have some security vulnerabilities that arise as a result of Microsoft support starting to taper off. And so what we're doing is introducing a Series B version of the PanelView Plus 7 performance that'll be out in a few months at this point that will run Windows IoT 10, and it'll have abstraction layer between IoT 10 and your applications and ActiveX objects and such that those applications can execute within IoT 10 through that abstraction layer, and you can get a faster performance because the new Series B product will have a faster CPU, it'll have more memory, but you won't have to do extensive re-engineering of your solution. You can basically get the Series B unit, run IoT 10, and then load your existing configurations directly into it. So stay tuned for the Series B. It's real close.
Al, just a couple of follow-up questions.
Did we lose the audio?
You kind of dropped out there, Julia. You want to try that again?
Wonder if anybody else not hearing it. I know on our side that we're not hearing audio.
Yeah, no, she dropped out. I can't hear her at the moment.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Is there
While we
some-
let Julia come back here, because I know in terms of in the timing we're at, we may have a few minutes if people are able to stay, if there's some questions we want to get to. This was the last formal slide of our presentation, but I did want to highlight the fact is that, you know, from our website that we've done a lot of work with, there are ways that the team can, and you can get on there to download demo versions of Thin Manager and of the View Designer. Actually, if you have Studio 5000 today, you have View Designer already. So if you want to get your hands on something, play with some of the software, you have that capability to do so. But from our standpoint, you know, and again, we'll open it up for questions here, but we do want to thank the Rumsey team. We want to thank all the customers that are on here. Lex, we appreciate your involvement here, and as Julia's as well, if we get Julia back to moderate anything here, but we really appreciate you guys giving us some time. We're happy to present it to you. We hope that there was benefit, and we want to be there to help answer any questions as you continue to look at how you can take advantage of these new offerings. Lex, are you still on? Any other final thoughts from the field? And again, we want to support, I talk to Lex on a regular basis, so continue to use that local touch point that you have with Lex in the area there. But Lex, any other comments on your side?
No, I mean, I think that was a lot of good information, and I think the Series Bs we're looking at what, October, November time frame. Just for everyone's edification, that's only going to be a series change, so the part numbers are going to be the same, and you can't order. You know, they'll just start showing up as Series B units. I believe that's correct. The other
That's correct.
thing that
It's a running change.
I think what Julia might have been hitting at is the second part of the question in the chat, which was around VNC with Thin Manager for view only on the Palamute 7 with the Win 10 IoT. Is that something that's in there?
That actually, I don't think is in there. I think what they're doing now as they button that up is they're having to be pretty careful about what is in and out of scope. So I would recommend that the folks on the Rockwell side and the Rumsey side keep track of that through our seismic system. There's a very detailed presentation that talks about the scope of what's included in the product, and I think the VNC thing got taken out just in the last, say, month or so. So I don't think it is, but stay tuned for updates.
And now I try to copy and paste from the history into just the chat again. I don't know if you see that now. That's the full question in its entirety.
Okay.
And I think we touched on most of that, just in case you want to look at that, if there was anything else that would be valuable information on that.
So I am back in limited form. I would offer Sawmill. I know that was your question. If you want to unmute, did the guys answer your question to the extent you were looking for information? I obviously had some computer issues and I missed that, but please feel free to ask any follow-on questions. I think we touched on it a few different ways, but I don't know if it was in as much detail as you were looking for.
Maybe someone had to drop off. Some, are you still with us?
We'll see if he comes back there. I guess with that, can I open it up to any other questions? I know we still have a variety of customers on the phone. It's not often that we have a multitude of Rockwell product managers right in front of us, but just things on your mind in terms of HMI, things you're seeing, things you're wondering, anything that you saw or wondered here today, any reasons or things you want to ask about in terms of why you haven't adopted the panel view 5000 yet, maybe, or you've been looking at it. I know we talked briefly, well, if we have any customers thinking about that, you mentioned a few things that were coming in the View 8 release. Did you have estimated timing on that View 8 release?
Yeah, so I'd say it's probably a month out now at this point. Or I take it back, 6 weeks, let's call it.
Still pretty close.
Yeah. So we're basically buttoning it up now. All the functionality's been pretty much programmed and debugged, and it's a matter of buttoning it up and producing the actual downloadable files.
So for those that are writing Santa lists, you know, you're going to get that before the holidays, right? That's an important piece.
It'll be under the tree for you.
It's I guess it sounds like it's targeted around automation fair actually.
Yeah, but just by coincidence, it's not. It wasn't a conscious plan. It just ended up that way.
No, that's the Rockwell holiday, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That is true.
Well, for any customers that are looking to get hands-on with some of the new hardware or systems, do we have demos available that customers can borrow and try the PanelView 5000? Do we have Thin Manager demos if they want to start looking at that from some of the security or usability features?
Well, Tom, you want to grab the Thin Manager question, and then we can come back to the PanelView 5000 question?
Sure. So Thin Manager is available for a 30-day demo download, and you can get that from the thinmanager.com website very easily. Just install it. It'll be a full up and running redundant version for 30 days. And you can reach out to anyone on the Thin Manager team if you have any questions while you're doing that.
And relative to evaluating the PanelView 5000, Chris mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again just for emphasis. The View Designer software that's used to configure the PanelView 5000 actually comes with Studio 5000. It's basically available free of charge, included in that bundle of software. And so if you have control logics or compact logics processors that you're programming with Studio 5000, you already have the software. You got it for free. And that software has an emulation function in it where if you configure a simple screen with a few buttons and a few numerical displays, and by the way, there are tutorials, both downloadable that the Rockwell and Rumsey folks can provide to you, or you can use, there's a YouTube playlist that includes like 50 different YouTube videos that explain how to do these various basic functions. Once you've got a screen configured, you can emulate that. If you happen to have a physical controller you can connect to, you can actually emulate the activity of the terminal on your PC, including at various button functions where you might press a button and set a bit in the controller. You can do all of that stuff directly over a network into a physical controller. Or there's a new emulator that's just started shipping, Logix Echo, and View Designer works with that as well. So even if you don't have an actual physical controller, you can emulate a controller on your PC, emulate the PanelView 5000 product on your PC, and fully evaluate the entire thing, soup to nuts, there just on your local box. At that point, you might want to actually see one before you go ahead and take the plunge, in which case the Rumsey folks or the Rockwell folks could show you a physical unit. But in terms of how it actually operates, you can basically get a really good handle on that without the use of a physical terminal.
Great, thank you. And then we did have a chat question come in. You may have just addressed it a few minutes ago regarding true alarm history in 5000. Did we address that? Is that what you told us to keep our eyes on seismic for?
No, actually, alarm history in the 5000 has been in there since V7. So it's been in there for, I don't know, 9 months roughly. So that was a pretty serious hole in the functionality of the PanelView 5000 up until V7, but now alarm history is in there.
So that the one question was around true alarm history, and I don't know what the difference is. Maybe what we had for alarm history in V6 versus V7, has it changed?
Yes, in fact, in V6 we had something called Alarm Manager that showed you all the different alarms that were currently present in the system, but it didn't give you a history of alarms that had come and gone. But in V7 we added I guess I'll call it in quotes, a true history function where it actually, if an alarm should arise and then be acknowledged and or just subside, the alarm condition is no longer present. You know, you have let's say that you have an input signal from a switch that says, oh, it's an alarm, and then that switch gets turned back off again. The alarm history now will capture that information and display it to you, along with things like when it was acknowledged, and you can silence alarms and you can hide them and so on. And so there is a full-blown alarm history function as of V7, and V7 came out, I don't know, not quite a year ago now.
Okay, great. What other questions do we have from those on the phone? And anything from our Rumsey specialists on the phone? Anything other customers have been wondering that these folks might also be wondering, questions you've heard lately?
Not so much a question, Julia, but I did also want to reiterate that from a demo perspective, we do have a working thin manager demo at Rumsey that we can bring people, as well as using virtual images. We can do virtual demonstrations of thin manager as well, working within the product and seeing how clients interact with the server. So if customers need a little more information on thin manager, they can reach out to their Rumsey account manager or anybody in the ASG group, and we can schedule some time to go through thin manager.
Thank you, Steve. And that is the most effective way to have the conversation with Thin Manager, is to demonstrate the product. It really does have to be seen to be believed.
All right. Well, I don't see anything else in the chat. If there's nothing else from anybody on the phone that cares to unmute, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up here. I appreciate the folks from Rockwell joining the call. I will send out a follow-up to this with maybe just a couple of pieces of information, a link to maybe download the Thin Manager 30-day trial if anybody's interested, and some notes about what was said in terms of trying View Studio because it's already in your Studio 5000 software. Maybe a link to the YouTube playlist. And then if anybody has any follow-on questions to that, feel free to respond to my email and we'll get them to Lex and to Chris and to the other product managers on the phone here. All right.
Excellent. Appreciate your help on that, Julia. Thank you very much.
All right. So with that, we'll let everybody get on with their day. Welcome back to the office. Again, hope you had a nice holiday weekend. I feel like we're probably all in the swing of things now. So have a good rest of your day. And thank you to the Rockwell folks on the phone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Talk to you all again soon.